Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Story Show. My name's Rich Markosian. On the show today, we've got a very exciting guest. It's Eric Peterson from the Utah Investigative Journalism Project. Eric has been an investigative journalist for, probably 10 years or more?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he worked for City Weekly for quite a few years as a staff writer. But he has kind of the affliction of wanting to do meaningful investigative work, and he knows all about pulling grandma reports and digging deep into the cronyism and corruption that exists in Utah. So we're going to talk about different investigations he's done over the years, what he's found out, what we should be looking for. I think it's actually one of the most important things that local journalism can provide is actually scrutinizing our political leaders, finding out where the money is coming from that's funding them, and then examining the decisions they're making based on the money they're receiving. Eric, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So related to that issue, I saw a piece in the Salt Lake Tribune that Salt Lake or Utah has one of the highest rates of special interest involvement in local politics. It's something like 93% of all the money that's given to campaigns is given from big corporations. Do you think there's enough work being done examining how our political leaders are deciding on legislation or proposing legislation based on the special interest money they're getting?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think there's always needs to be a lot of scrutiny on these types of donations and influence. And it's hard to say sometimes, like, just based on like hearing, like kind of like a number like that. What does that translate into? Does a donation really equal a favor? Because the reality is, that there's a lot of legislators, especially in Utah, it's very conservative, really free market, minded lawmakers. And if they get a donation from a particular industry that they already believed in and support, it's, I think a lot of times it's just it's not necessarily as transactional as people think. It's kind of like, of course I already support the oil industry or, this lobby or whatever, I believe in what they do, so why wouldn't I take the money? But you do really kind of have to really kind of parse through that stuff to start to feel if a donation is something more, is it related to a really specific issue, and then maybe it's not something that's ordinarily that a legislator is involved in. It's like, is it out of ordinary? Is the context of like donations and legislation being passed, is that suspect? So it's easy to kind of see smoke from like a figure like that, but you do kind of have to like dig a little deeper to like figure out, is there bad intent behind what's going on? Is the public interest getting kind of shortchanged for, a transaction between a powerful interest, and a public official?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you can't possibly know if they're, as you said, when there's smoke, if there's fire, because you really can't know as the public, because we can't follow every bill. We can't follow every single special interest dollar, and we can't follow the voting records of all these people. It's just an enormous job. It would be an enormous job to try to figure out what influence all of that money has on our politicians. But it's kind of hard to imagine that just out of the goodness of their hearts, they're giving this money to these political leaders, and that it isn't done with some kind of strings attached, right?
Right. Yeah. I think from the business side of things, like, I think, there's probably a lot of businesses that do kind of have like kind of a, their kind of PR spin sometimes. But I think candidly, a lot of, business folks who are already in, uh, the business world understand the idea of trying to buy some goodwill. And it's not necessarily nefarious. It's interesting. There's a lot of groups or whatnot that will donate to everybody. I think there's some companies that regularly, they send a check to every legislator, on the Hill, and it's just kind of covering their bases and saying, we support you,
Yeah. Please don't pass anything that will put us out of business.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think that until you do the work that you do you really begin to see where the rubber hits the road in terms of the donations translating into policy and decisions. And so the first story you did that really popped up on my radar when you were working for City Weekly was when you did an investigation and you found that that they were talking about moving the prison, which is in Bluffdale, and there's all this land around the prison, and you looked into who actually was owning this land, and you found out that the Senate President, Wayne Niederhauser, was involved with a developer, and he was a part owner in this land that was just right around the prison. And he was the one spearheading the move of the prison. And I mean, when you come across that, I guess you can't automatically assume that that's his reasoning behind moving the prison, but it sure seems like it's going to be a nice windfall for him if they do, right?
Right. And, I think in these situations, doing like investigations and reporting on conflicts of interest, this conflict that a public official has between, public power, public duty, and private gain. I always try and like approach it from saying, this is the appearance of a conflict of interest. And, kind of like just what we were talking about, it's perhaps impossible for me to really get inside Wayne's head, or any politician's head who gets into one of these situations and know, really what was the balance of their intent. Were they really just, completely doing it for themselves, or how they rationalize it, or what their thought process is. But the point is that in good government, all of these conflicts have to at least be kind of disclosed or addressed.
Just bring it out in the open.
Yeah, just bring it out and just say, we're doing this big project. We're gonna try and move the prison. If he just like sent out something, or made even any kind of comment beforehand and say, I have real estate in this area, for what it's worth, I think that's important. And again, it's not necessarily an indictment that there is a conflict of interest, but, not disclosing conflicts, I think is problematic. I don't think it, is in the spirit of transparency, and good governance. And so that's an important function, I think, like, reporters and journalists have is to look at these things, call them out, and then, let everybody, give them the opportunity to explain it,
Yeah.
And, in that case, I remember speaking with Wayne Niederhauser that night, and he was pretty forthcoming. We had a good talk about it, and I represented what he said, and I think that was an important part of the process. But again, yeah, I mean, I'm not passing judgment on these people, but like I'm on the alert for these kinds of conflicts that are not discussed, and these things that are not transparent. And just asking the question, why is that?
Well, and I think when they aren't open and willing to be completely honest and transparent with the public, if they have something that they is their little pet project, and that pet project would directly benefit from some legislation that would be passing, I think at that point you can kind of assume, well, why aren't they disclosing that? At that point, I think more of the general public would really benefit to know, oh wow, okay, he's gonna potentially earn a huge payday if
Right.
this legislation that he's spearheading is going to pass.
Yeah.
And I just think that happens quite often in Utah, doesn't it? Where somebody's benefiting, one of their pet projects is benefiting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and again, it's one of those things like you just feel like, I mean, this is, I mean, not only are like lawmakers and public officials, you know, conservative, red state, you know, public leaders, but it's still a red state in general. Like I think like if they had just come out and disclose right up front, I don't think it would like really hamstring
mm-mm.
their, you know, their project or what they want to see happen. You know, like I think a lot of people in Utah are fine with the idea of saying, you know, looking at something and saying, "Oh, he might gain something from it, but the public will gain something from it too." So I'm fine with it. But like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not willing to like just, you know, play your cards face up for everyone to see, then yeah, it does look suspicious, and that's a hard thing to avoid. I think if you're gonna go that route.
Yeah. So speaking of Wayne Niederhauser, in our current January issue of Utah Stories with my dog on the cover, that's Scamps, Eric's written this story called Cash Canyon, and so just to summarize this story, it's again dealing with Wayne Niederhauser, our Senate president. He's just retired, so I guess he's not Senate president anymore. But this Canyon Center development that's at the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon's been in development for years, and it's basically just they keep proposing things. The neighbors kept shooting it down, and the neighborhood and the community kept rallying against the project because it's a scenic corridor that gets going up to the Little Cottonwood Canyon, and they wanted to build two giant hotels. Wayne Niederhauser is he a partner, a developer in the project?
Yeah.
And they were able to get sign on or buy in through UTA that this needed to have a parking element that would be a public parking area.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And then the public parking area, they were concerned with how they're going to finance it. And Niederhauser again is proposing there be a toll booth at the bottom of the canyon that would directly benefit the building of this parking structure for his development project, right?
So the I mean, there's some interesting things going on there. So they have this development, and you know they're able to get you know some funding, some tax increment funding to help pay for it. It's public money, you know, it's going to be paid back, but I think it was, if I recall, it was like about $7.5 million. But there's another aspect of it too, which is that you know before Niederhauser left the legislature, he did pass this legislation that would effectively make it possible now for there to be really toll roads, and you know in passing his bill, the specific examples he were talking about was like the need to toll, you know, around the Little and Big, you know, Cottonwood Canyon roads, and you know that he did not directly, you know, it wasn't like directly in that specific legislation to say, you know, this is specifically going to help pay for this parking garage, but you can see there's a pretty clear case, you know, that bill is definitely going to benefit this development. You know, the development will be in a position to, you know, take advantage of people, you know, who might want to like stop somewhere and then carpool up the canyon or something like that. Like his spot will be key for that. And in you know his committee hearings, he did talk about, you know, the possibility, you know, that some of these toll funds could help things like, you know, parking garages and the likes like that.
Yeah, so he did bring that forward that it would that's how the tolls would be used for
Yeah, he said
parking
things like
garages.
that. You know, like a parking garage.
Not
Yeah,
my particular
right.
parking garage per se.
Right. Didn't mention his development by name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing with that story too. That I think about with these kinds of stories is that there's an element to, you know, we were talking a little bit before about how, you know, it's hard for the public to like try and keep track of every donation in every bill that gets passed, and it's an important role for the media to play as watchdogs and that kind of thing. But it's also really interesting to think about too. Kind of the challenge of like tracking something over the course of years, right? And
Yeah.
the attention span sometimes for different projects, it waxes and wanes. There's times, right, with this Canyon Center development that people were really up in arms, or with moving the prison. But sometimes, the people who benefit, it's the benefit might happen to them, kind of after the hue and cries died down, and that's what I thought was interesting too with like the Cash Canyon thing is like, Niederhauser passes this, and then it's not, till he's out of office, and then all of a sudden you see these things are getting finalized with this project. There's public financing for this, this parking garage that will help it out, and now it's going to look like there'll be toll roads there, and that'll help out the city, and they'll, and then the city is, very supportive of this development. They're allowing. One of the interesting things in researching that was also finding out that they decided that this development didn't need to offer any moderately affordable housing. Even though all across the state, people are trying to bang the drum and say, like, we've got a huge population problem, we need more affordable housing. When it kind of gets down to the nitty gritty, it's like, well, not this time.
Yeah, for everywhere else, sure, but not for mine.
Yeah, but like that's one of those things. It's like all the elements sometimes they don't come together right when everybody's paying attention.
Yeah, I think that's the greatest point about it. It's like the news cycle and the supposed attention span of viewers is so short.
Right.
And the way the newspapers typically operate is you got to get in and out of a story in a day or so. And to do a long-term investigation as a reporter, at the Tribune, that's more rare. There's a couple guys who do them there. But you're seeing a lot less of that. And do you feel like we as a democratic republic are going to suffer as the decline of newspapers continues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that attention span issue is just so pernicious, right? I mean, it's so problematic for us as a society, and it's really problematic if our reporters aren't in a good position to like be able to follow stories that take a long time to kind of gestate, and keep their eye on the ball. Yeah, and it's really difficult. I mean, it's at the heart of why I started my nonprofit. Was when I started at the Salt Lake City Weekly, like 2007, 2008. I remember we had like a meeting where we had a couple of meetings that just seem weird to think about now. One where it was like, okay, you guys need to put content on the website and try and put a blog up like every day, and everyone was just in revolt, like, what? And we're like, when we had like a conversation, it's like, you guys have to start tweeting, and nobody like had any idea what tweeting was, and but before that though, like it was interesting because it was a weekly paper, like we weren't like trying to turn a story around every day, so we like had more time to just sit there and think about things and dig into stories and try and do bigger kind of enterprise projects. And it's not a fault of the City Weekly management at the time that they wanted us to start blogging and tweeting, because that was every newspaper and news outlet in the country and world was suddenly saying, yeah, everyone should be doing this, you should be putting social media has created this incredible platform. We want you to be making content like every minute, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's taken a lot too long, I think, for people to realize that this trying to force reporters to keep up with the like instantaneous speed of the current news cycle is really not helpful for like impactful reporting. Like,
Yeah,
it's so distracting,
And it's like the news cycle and what everybody else is reporting on, at least in the national media, is all the stuff we as citizens can make no difference about.
Right? Yeah.
It's like you talking about Donald Trump in our local Salt Lake Tribune and how you don't like him has no impact. We cannot do anything about him. So it's like, I think it's if they could double down on investigative journalism and maybe leave out more of the day-to-day horror that's going on, then perhaps we'd all be better off. And
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just my opinion, but we can actually, the thing that I like about hyper local journalism, especially investigative journalism, is when you report on it, you can actually make a direct impact on public opinion
Yeah.
and policy.
Yeah.
And I look at, like, for example, how they tried to roll out the medical cannabis legislation a year ago, and it was so flawed. It was so totally full of cronyism and ways in which the state could just be the main beneficiary in the legislature.
Yeah.
And it was cool to see that that got a groundswell underneath it of enough people just saying no. And the same thing happened with this tax reform legislation that just got upended because enough people just were just like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so if newspapers aren't the major catalyst for making that kind of change happen, do you think groups like yours can do that, can fill that role? Or
Yeah.
independent reporters? Or
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see, nonprofit journalism. I think it's going to be a really nonprofit and, like, more independent journalism. I'm hoping that it can be this thing that kind of helps prop up some of, like, the legacy kind of media institutions. There's a movement. I think there's a feeling among some, like, nonprofit media groups that they feel like that their that their organizations will pretty much just take over, like your local paper, like the Tribune or local programming, and they'll just do it better, and it'll all be funded through donations. And I would really like to avoid that if possible, because I feel like the media ecosystem just needs to kind of, like, help each other kind of fill the gaps, because I love doing investigative journalism, but, like, you still need people, like, that are just covering the day-to-day stuff, but with good focus and attention on what's going on, and kind of I see like organizations like mine being able to kind of try and help a lot of different media, like, just kind of add some to their coverage,
yeah,
and help them out.
Well, the stuff you add into the Salt Lake Tribune, I think, adds a ton of value to that paper.
Yeah.
And when you're able to follow a long format story like you did recently with following up kind of on what Greg Hughes did with Terry Deal and all of that, UTA board, the way the UTA board members were able to really take advantage of those seats and in some cases really cash in. I mean, I just don't. Is anybody on the staff of the Tribune able to really dig that deep anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think they still get. I mean, they've got some really talented.
Yeah,
staff.
they do. They have got. I mean, Robert Gerke's done some really good work, and I like Ben Wood and.
But it's still I mean it's just crazy. I mean, like, even like when you have, like, really talented staff, there is just so much going on. It's hard to fathom sometimes. Like, I sometimes wish I could just kind of, like, conceptualize in my mind, like, how much, like, dirt is going on that's not getting aired out, that, like, even with our best intentions, like, that we're just not catching up on, and just, like, meaningful stuff. And and that example, like, with the Greg Hughes and the UTA story, I mean, that was another one of those situations where it was, still a really kind of burning issue, but like it's just been kind of like smoldering recently, and it's not as been in the public's eye. And there had been this investigative report that I knew existed, and it took like 2 years to get it, and I kept getting so much flack, and being told that no, this investigation is still ongoing, and something's gonna happen, like that's kind of a frustrating thing because it's
Walk us through that particular story a little bit more.
Yeah.
With Greg Hughes, he's running for governor right now.
Yeah.
He's a very charismatic politician. Like I know he got in front of the whole crowd that were so pissed off about the cannabis legislation, and I was so impressed with how he was able to deflect all these questions. He's just an amazing politician. But tell us what was it that started all that, and how did that all go down with the UTA board seats? And
yeah, I mean it's a pretty long and complicated tale. I'm sure I'm probably gonna miss out parts of it, but in essence, something I was just trying to follow up on that had been kind of like a big story. Boy, it's been now like 8 years or something like that, or longer. It's been like 10 years. There was just a major issue. The UTA had a board, and there's a board member, Terry Deal, and there was a lot of discussion about where to site this front runner station in Draper, and it didn't come out until too late that they found out that Terry Deal had an interest in developing the land, and he was also part of like the people that were making the decision about placing it there. Mm-hmm. So then again, it's one of those situations where there was a conflict, and it wasn't really disclosed in a timely manner. Eventually was, but he leaves the board, and he also. Greg Hughes is on the board, and there's a lot of discussion. Greg Hughes, he's a Draper Republican, and he had a lot of influence with the city government there. And the thing that I had been like kind of trying to chase was hearing from sources about some kind of payment from Terry Deal to Greg Hughes that had never been really reported on. And I think initially, I was wondering, was this just a cash payment? What was it? Was it a business deal? And I knew that I had been told, that there was an investigative report, that, had details on it. But, it's like an ongoing investigation for almost 10 years. Yeah. And so I had to keep kind of fighting just to try and get that report. And it was very difficult. In Utah, it's a state records committee, and it's a really interesting body where if you try and request records from an agency, you get denied, you appeal it, you get denied. You can appeal it again and go before this committee, and they're like a citizen committee, and you can kind of have this fun kind of mock trial thing where you argue your case, and you might be arguing against an assistant attorney general. And I actually was requesting this report when Terry Deal had been charged in federal court for misstating something as bankruptcy. That case eventually got dropped against him. But when that case was dropped against him, I was in the middle of my first records request, and I was able to say to the Attorney General's office, I said, "Hey, it looks like this case is over, so there's nothing ongoing anymore. You should be able to give me that report." And they're like, "Well, yeah, actually, I think we can." And then they were going to give me the report then, and they came back a week later and they said, "Actually, it's still ongoing. So FBI is still investigating." And when I went to the State Records Committee, initially the feeling was like the committee was just like, well, if the FBI is investigating, I don't think we want to have this record be turned over. They want to defer to the FBI. Feeling being that, are charges going to happen? Is something new, that some new charge, is that going to result? And if they release the report, is it going to complicate their investigation? And then
So they just come
year,
up with a new excuse
yeah,
to not give it to you.
yeah. But then eventually they could not you know keep saying it was an open investigation. And all along I was saying, well, even if there is an open investigation, this stuff happened so long ago. I don't understand how the statute of limitations hasn't run out. And when they finally did say the investigation's over, they had to explain and say, well, there weren't any charges that could be brought because the statute of limitations is run out. So clock gets run out.
So
Nobody
that's
gets
the
in
assistant
trouble.
attorney general who's holding that and not giving it to you? Is that who you got to convince? Is that you?
Yeah, but they were being told by the FBI, you can't turn this over.
Okay, so the FBI is the one influencing that
Yeah.
decision making, not them or somebody
Yeah.
who else, another party that doesn't want it to come out.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting.
Oh, I eventually did get the record. I forgot to mention, about
yeah,
the payment.
eventually you did.
And
5 years later.
Yeah. And there, and there it did show that, there were, it wasn't like just like a, something, it wasn't that sinister. It's just like a cash payment or something. But, there were very sizable loans, from Terry Deal's company to Greg Hughes' company, right in the middle of like when, there was a lot of critical stuff going on with this deal, and Greg Hughes was doing stuff to help make it happen. The total checks being about $350,000. And it was paid back, but like this was also, I think, shortly post recession. So, I mean, if you're a businessman and you get a friendly loan that's for $350,000, in a down economy, like that's not nothing.
Yeah,
right?
That's quite a lot of money, huh?
Yeah.
And if I understand right, Greg Hughes and Kevin Garden, they both benefited from where the front runner station ended up. I mean it.
Yeah, Kevin Garn, I'd have to double check. There were so many people involved. I can't remember if he was a principal in that one or it might have been a different development.
Oh, okay.
Couldn't say for absolute.
I mean, my overall big picture examination, when I look and we start to delve into politics, and there's so many more examples, is that it's like a big good old boys club. And once you're in the state legislature, you are a staunch Republican, you prove that you're a stalwart and you can be trusted, then it just seems like they're kind of like dealing out little, piles of candy. Like, why don't you go buy this land over here, and maybe we'll think about putting a front runner station there, and then maybe they'll get everybody in line. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating, but it just seems like the most overt example of the cronyism that exists in Utah is the way these communities all along the Wasatch Front look all the same, and they're all homogeneous development, and usually there's just a few developers who try to control all of the economics of that development. And you look, just as you go along the Wasatch Front, what's happened with like you just go from Draper to Sandy to Bountiful to Farmington, and you have just so much corporate retail there, and you have so many just big developer driven projects.
Yeah.
I assume it's probably common all over the country, but it just seems like it's like they're trying to monopolize the buying public into their developments and into their projects, and there's a few developers that try to control the economy.
Yeah.
You think that's an accurate look at it?
Yeah, I think, when I think about these kinds of things, my default always isn't focused too much on, like, is there something hardwired into, like, a particular political party? I'm always looking at these kinds of stories, these kinds of transactions, policies, business deals, kind of at the level of power.
Yeah.
And and this is a conservative state, and we Republicans end up, the scrutiny of a lot of interesting investigative pieces because Republicans have power here. Like, there's not a lot of Democrats with enough power to abuse it here.
Yeah.
It happens sometimes. I'm always looking for those stories as well. But in Utah, you further get into that that mix of saying now, okay, all right, so what is it about development? Why are these stories so prominent all the time? And I think you get into that further and kind of just like look at our environment and say, okay, well, this is also Utah where we love to have a lot of kids, and
very quickly growing population,
booming population, and they need to go somewhere, and it's a tremendous opportunity for the developers to cash in on, and if you are a developer and also a lawmaker or someone in a position to use your power to kind of like cut through the red tape and make your houses go up faster and more dense, then you're going to make more money. And that seems to be a really interesting and prevalent kind of power dynamic in Utah. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. And I think you're right, with that kind of thing. There's just so much money to be made in that sense that you do hear about a lot of these stories where it's you have the legislators, they're developers, they're looking to benefit from projects, and it's just so common. I mean, we got with the House Speaker Brad Wilson, he's a developer. Senate President Stuart Adams, he's a developer. That was another story I did like a few years back, was about the West Davis Corridor project and how that was going to benefit a lot of northern Utah real estate developers. And lo and behold, developers like Stuart Adams, who, were also, vigorous proponents of the West Davis Corridor, while not also really talking about all the real estate they owned in that area that would stand to increase in value once that road got put in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be an interesting examination to just point out who are all the people involved in real estate who are in the Senate, who are in the House, what they own, where they own it, and what the bills they are trying to pass might benefit their developments. I mean, it's probably a ton of legislation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool that you get that information out there, because as far as comparing the type of coverage that you get from the television news and a lot of what's in the newspaper about, deaths on our highway and murders and rapes and fires, I think this is the stuff that actually can make a difference, because if our political leaders aren't after our best interests, if really what they're doing is facilitating their own projects and their own work, then why are we giving them our taxpayer money?
Right.
What is it they're doing for us? And I think that 15, 20 years ago, the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News each had a dozen reporters at Capitol Hill during the legislative session right now.
Yeah.
And now there's maybe 3 from each paper examining. It's just not nearly as many people with their eyes on the ball of what's actually happening that's impacting our lives.
Yeah.
And I guess I mean, is there any hope that nonprofits, or that what Huntsman's doing with the Salt Lake Tribune will somehow again bring a resurgence in the media, or the scrutiny that we need to have of these sessions and what the legislation is? Do you see any hope for the?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this. Well, actually, I was about to say I wouldn't be doing this nonprofit if I wasn't hopeful, but that's not true. I would do that even if I was cynical about it. Just as I've got that sickness, I have to do this.
Yeah,
this kind of journalism.
It's just like it is like a sickness.
Yeah.
It's like we were thinking about it just the last 2 weeks because we realized we needed to bring in more revenue, and we're like, oh well, man, look at like all the food magazines. They seem to sell a lot of ads. Well, maybe we could do a food magazine. And it's like what you need to do to sell your free time so you can do what you really want to do in the journalism world. But it's I kind of hope, I kind of think there might be hope from crowdfunding. I think
Yeah.
that model of you show your passion for something you want to do, and if you can get that crowd funded, everybody find a just find 10,000 people who want to give you $1 each.
Yeah.
I think that might be a potential solution for it.
I think that's something. I think that's part of it. But I've also been kind of like that idea. I'm a little bit suspicious of it too, just because I think there have been people who've talked about like kind of like media giving people what they want, and I think you see that kind of segmentation kind of happening more at like kind of the national media level. Like there are outlets that have figured out, like we're gonna figure out how to really provide kind of a niche coverage of like food or sports or something. I think like Deadspin and outlets like that. They're kind of like really getting hardcore on an interest.
Yeah, one particular thing.
But there's also something to be said about like I'm afraid this kind of makes me sound elitist, but sometimes like people really want to hear about something that they've never heard about, and they don't know how to like, like that's a thing. Like I like try and convince people is like I'm going to do investigative journalism, but I can't necessarily say, what it's going to be just on this subject or what it's about, like
Or
sometimes
how extensive it goes. Or what
yeah,
it's gonna get
and
into.
like there are stories out there that need talented people to just dig into that people will want to hear about, but they also have no idea it's going on, and you need people like trying to unearth these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, I totally agree. And something I want to talk to you about, it has to do with the idea of why Bernie Sanders is so popular, and the corporatization of America, and what corporate powers and entities are doing all over the earth. Let's talk about that in a minute. I want to read a couple messages from our sponsors. The Utah Story Show is brought to you in part by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you're getting those precious extra minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to mommy or cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. On-campus housing is a community of academic support, peers, mentors, friends, and constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, theme options, and to apply, visit usu.edu/housing. So, with the rise of both populism and the rise of Bernie Sanders, I think we're seeing a trend nationally where people are really starting to realize that capitalism does have some pretty adverse side effects. And one of those being that you're seeing a greater divide between the rich and the poor. And you're starting to see how capitalism can really spread its tentacles to other countries. And even when it's operational in other countries, you're seeing even greater divides between the rich and the poor, because it's all about serving shareholder interests, not necessarily paying your employees the best wages or giving people the best working conditions. But do you think that the message that the model of capitalism is flawed is a message that is resonating with people because something drastic needs to be done, like we need to become a socialist country?
Right.
I mean, this is going a bit off topic, but I want to bring this up because I think it has to do with journalism, and I'll bring it back around there in a minute.
Boy, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it's certainly resonating with people, the idea that capitalism isn't working out. I couldn't imagine saying that sentiment is necessarily I don't know if that I don't know if it's hard to say if that's like reality. I'm not sure I would say that's reality. I mean, I'd say that, that
Would you say it's reality that more power and more money is going into the hands of fewer people now than it was 10,
yeah.
20 years ago?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, just being an armchair economist, I mean, I think we've all heard, statistics to that effect, talking about the inequality of income and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a real sentiment there about what's happening, who's getting left behind, and what to do about it.
Because we're seeing this. I mean, the bigger trend we follow quite a bit on the podcast and in Utah Stories is you're seeing this divide, this greater divide between the rich and the poor, and you're seeing a homeless population, especially in the biggest cities, really burgeoning. And talking to these homeless people, you find that these are people who feel disenfranchised by the system that's out there. A lot of them have to say things like, well, I would never want to take a job at Walmart, so I choose to be homeless.
Huh.
And I got that sentiment from a homeless millennial story I did a few months ago. And I'm like thinking about that, well, damn, I wouldn't want to work at Walmart either if that's what you feel like your choices are. But I think that a lot of people are feeling like they would be slaves to a system that they don't want to be a part of. And I have a cousin who really believes that this capitalist system is exploiting labor to make the rich richer, and keeps people in a sort of mental state of mind where they're basically robots, and they're just promoting consumerism and materialism to try to keep them in a job that is oppressive. But how I relate that back to what we were talking about is we see that without the scrutiny of local journalism, and if it is really easy to make these backroom board deals, and nobody is actually able to look and examine what our leaders are doing, isn't the problem of crony capitalism going to only become worse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a yeah, I mean, that's a statement I can agree with. That lacking scrutiny, these kinds of self-interested dealings, with corporations and governments and corporations with governments. Of course, that's always gonna get worse, and it's certainly going to keep, feeding this feeling of being left behind by the economy, and being stuck in this permanent have-not caste system. When I do through my nonprofit, I always do I do trainings, for local newsrooms and a lot of student journalists too. And sometimes when I'm talking about kind of the elements of investigative stories, I usually have like a presentation of like a cow pie with mushrooms growing out of it, and I'm saying like, this is it's a dark, rich environment. It's there's no sunlight, and it's rich, and you always find in intersections in public life where money comes in and transparency goes out, something bad happens, like something either gets wasted, or something gets skimmed off the top to benefit somebody, right? Like, and that's
a good analogy.
That's a problem that's always going to happen. And and you have less people scrutinizing these kinds of things, then more of it will happen. Like it's important to have media that looks into these things and can kind of help check forces that are interested in a short-term gain against a long-term, more diffuse, broader benefit to the society and community. And I do kind of push back against a lot of feeling that that there's a lot of like kind of corporate and establishment kind of conspiracy. I think it's just in the aggregate, there's a lot of kind of short-sighted decisions, and from the federal government down to your city government, from the small businesses up to giant multinational corporations and things like that, where there's a lot of just kind of like bad decisions that seem in a vacuum to them at that time, and that combined, they're causing this sudden rift, that's actually could be very self-defeating for them. Like, I don't think any of these companies would, take that shortcut that, helps their bottom line for the quarter they're in, if they knew that, 10 years down the road, it means the country becomes socialist. They certainly don't want that, but they're not thinking that far ahead. And so that's, a really important role, for journalists to fill, is to be able to, like, kind of check these things, bring it out into the sunshine, and, like, try and hopefully foster, like, an actual discussion.
Yeah, shine the light into dark places. And,
yeah.
And I bring that up because I think there's a lot of Bernie supporters and socialist-minded people, young people, who believe socialism is the answer, because we see the aftermath. We see the division between the rich and the poor, and we think, oh, well, that's a problem because there's not enough government. And the way I look at it, it's like, okay, you call yourself a social justice warrior, and we had somebody in our office working here who she called herself that.
Yeah.
Journalism is the best kind of social justice there is.
I agree. Yeah.
I think that if just taking from the rich and giving to the poor, which is essentially Bernie's solution, that's not social justice.
Right.
That's just thievery on a massive scale. I just would encourage more people to be citizen journalists or support more journalism and investigative journalism efforts to preserve capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that is, somebody was asking me about my political views, and I don't get very political on this program.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me that's where we've gotten a little off the rails, is just thinking more higher taxes and taking more from the rich and giving it to the poor is the solution. I think making the economic playing field more level is the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of, and I think a lot of this kind of goes back to the problems kind of like with our collective attention spans. And I don't know if it's kind of come across with what I've said already, but I'm actually fairly anti-social media. But like, I feel like, a lot of like what's happened most recently is, there is so much, social media is this incredible filtering machine when you're talking about all these different platforms, and it's really allowed people to just, align themselves quickly and easily with people that believe what they believe, and to quickly and easily diminish, block, ignore people with opinions that they don't agree with, or to see people with opinions they don't agree with, and not to see that person as a person, but as just, some emoji or an avatar or something, it's not a human thing. And so it's a lot easier for people to just hate people they disagree with. And these filterings make it so a lot of people are doing less critical thinking about things, and they just kind of glom onto the ideas they already have, they already support, and that their group kind of already supports. And with that, I feel like you get people who are driven to extreme ends of the spectrum, and so that's why you have people, why it seems to be kind of like pitching towards, like, are we going to come out? Are we going to come out of, the Trump administration, and go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and then it's going to be Bernie Sanders, and what about, a lot of the people who are just kind of getting motion sickness from like this pitch between these extremes, and just like wondering, where is the center, and can we get back there and just be mildly displeased with some of the things that are going on, instead of like being insanely for it or like insanely against it.
Yeah, it's
insanely
just mass
for or
hysteria.
against each other.
Yeah, it's. I think. I mean, I just can't watch CNN and Fox much anymore because it's just hysteria to one end or the other.
Yeah.
It's like what they're doing with impeachment. We're just hysterical about how obvious it is he's got to be out of office, or how obvious it is that he's innocent. And it's just you have a really difficult time finding any sort of even keel voice of moderation where you're actually examining facts but I think this whole, like what you brought up with social media is right on. It's like they know that if you are fed on Facebook very strong opinions that you might agree with, you're going to stay on the platform longer.
Yeah.
So there's a book I read called Zooked, and it's about the Facebook algorithm, and I had Pete Ashdown on the show to talk about it. They manipulate that algorithm, so you're being fed all this stuff that they know that you're gonna emotionally glom onto, and you're gonna like it. And if they can feed that to you all day, they know you're going to be on that platform a longer period of time, but then you're going to be all the stupider for it because it's just your own opinions that you already have. And interesting about that podcast, and I'm writing about that in our issue that comes out at the end of the week. We came out with that really anti-social media, anti-Facebook episode, and Facebook then they didn't deplatform me, but they demonetized me in terms of being able to promote to our Utah Stories followers.
Really?
And they did not say why.
They demonetized you?
Well, they made it so we cannot get our posts out to our followers by paying them. So a few years ago, they made it so the only way more than like 5 of your followers for your business website are going to see your posts, you need to pay them.
Right.
And that's like, fine, okay, we'll give you $10 so our followers can see our posts. And now they say, no, we have taken your ability to promote your posts away. So, and I'm like, why? And why does this come like 3 weeks after we just criticized you? And it's like, do we really want to trust our sovereignty and our political discourse to Facebook if that's the way they're going to treat us?
Yeah.
And so, it was Facebook and Instagram. We can't get out to our followers anymore. And so subscribe to UtahStories.com newsletter. That's the only way we're going to get it out to you.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing. I think about a lot.
I think the public discourse, it's like, when do you ever see any good debates anymore? I mean, I really like spirited good debate when it's clear it's not so much agenda driven as it is two people with differing ideas that they want to share with each other and just come out to a good positive outcome. And I think without that, it's kind of scary to see where our country's going right now.
That the algorithm, with social media is so interesting because like I'm like one of those people that's kind of like addicted to like looking at Facebook. I like almost never post, but I can't help but like look at it, because it's essentially a drug. But I've also like thought a lot about the algorithm and have been like very intentional about trying not to like filter, what I look at and what I come through. And like I end up like having like a lot of people on my feed that are like all over the spectrum politically, and and I can confidently say people both on the left and the right that will post just the dumbest stuff, like and like I just like I'm not like weeding them out, I'm still allowing it, but it's also like physically hard sometimes to like look at something I disagree with so much and not like getting it off my feed, and then like I feel like
I do it every once in a while. I have to chime in on something I just really disagree with. I definitely have more friends on the left, even though I'm kind of more libertarian minded. But I think because I'm not a conservative, and I'm more of a, I guess I'm more of a liberal when I'm in the city, and I'm more of a libertarian when I'm in the country, because more people need more freedom when you're in rural areas, but you need to protect yourself from terrible air pollution and all the problems that we have from corporatization in the city. And but I don't know why you have to be Republican or Democrat. I just
Yeah.
don't get how that still makes sense in this age we live in. Why can't you just pull ideas from where you find them, and decide you're gonna decide on your own beliefs based on the validity of the ideas?
Yeah.
It's it just seems like a really narrow way of thinking, especially if we're like trying to live in a more enlightened
Yeah.
society. But do you have any investigations you're working on now that you want to plug, or anything that's come out recently?
Working on lots of stuff, but it's all top secret, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, you've had a lot of good ones come out
Yeah.
in the last 6 months. Seems like you've been really working hard.
Yeah.
Are you able to put a good like solid 8-hour day in and doing your investigations, or does your paid work get in the way?
Yeah, I mean I'm fully plugged into the gig economy, so my days are pretty interesting in the sense that, when you're essentially self-employed, you don't live in that world anymore where you're like, okay, it's 9 o'clock, I work till 5 o'clock. It's like I work all the time, but I'm not working on the same thing all the time, and I do have a lot of like side hustles and stuff I gotta do, so it's always like a juggling act. But I am able to, I still am in a good position to like really kind of focus in just on stories that I want to do, and spend some good time with them. And we are getting into a good spot lately where we're kind of attracting some contributors too that can help the nonprofit out with stories. And
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
And do you have quite a few bigger sized donors, or is it mostly individual contributors, or how does it?
It's really grassroots. It's mostly individual contributors, and that's, it's exciting. It's tough for nonprofits like mine in this position, and I think we're actually unique in a lot of ways because there's a lot of other kind of nonprofit newsrooms, whether they do all sorts of news or just investigative like we do, that they pop up in a state, and it's usually they usually get up and running because they kind of got like an angel donor that writes them a pretty big check to start with, and and they're paying people and renting an office and stuff like that, and we've been the exact opposite in that it's been gritty grassroots from the very beginning, but it's really kind of growing all the time, and we do get some bigger donations, not huge donations, but really just a lot of grassroots support. And for all that, I think we're actually the output we're doing is actually really incredible. I mean, like, we are doing really big, impactful stories.
Yeah.
Some of the most impactful work I've ever done in my whole career, has been through this, and it's really heartening to see people like I've like often like asked people donate like a couple bucks a month, and to see the size of that list that grows, it's really encouraging.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where can people go to donate to your project?
Oh yeah, go to our website. We're at utahinvestigative.org. You see the donate corner in the top right, and click on that. There's also got like contact info, like we have a PO box if people want to send in checks, or I always like to just get mail too, like I'm always interested in like news tips and stuff. I've been getting a lot of good response lately from people just reaching out with stories. I apologize if I'm not always able to get back to people, but
Yeah.
that's one of the encouraging things too lately, is a lot of people are recognizing this is just investigative journalism, and so I get pretty good tips from people that like want me to look into something,
Personal vendettas, you like those, right?
Yeah.
We get those. We were joking about that before. That's the most common. So if you're thinking of submitting to Eric or myself, it's how somebody screwed you.
Yeah.
Just realize we can't do a whole lot of those because it's just I get at least a couple personal vendettas every few months. And they're interesting, but unless you have a lot of proof and you can really give us the other side too, how we can contact the other side, that's probably not what we're going to do. But yeah, I think it's just awesome what you do, and I'm so glad it's growing. It's like, we talked about probably 4 years ago when you were leaving City Weekly about what you were going to do, and I would have loved to bring you on as a staff writer somehow, but we don't have any staff writers. We pay everybody as contributors, and it's a struggle, but I think as far as like finding meaning and value in your work, there's nothing better. I mean, if you can really make an impactful story and you can get it out to a lot of people, and then you impact the public discourse and you impact public policy and how the business of government operates, it's just really a rewarding thing to do, and I think it's awesome that you do such a great job at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so go visit UtahInvestigative.org and click on the donate button and hook Eric up. And I want to thank everybody for the support of this program. It's been really cool to meet a few of you who are listening to this podcast. I met somebody in Moab recently who said they really love this podcast, and that's super encouraging to hear. Our audience is growing slowly but surely. Obviously, when you're doing meaningful stuff and we never talk about celebrities, it's a little bit tough to grow an audience, but we really appreciate your support in sharing this with your friends and giving us a like or a subscribe on YouTube. And with that, I want to tell you about another one of our sponsors. The Utah Story Show is brought to you in part by Legends. Legends Pub and Grill is locally owned and serves fresh, wholesome, delicious ingredients. Legends features steaks, burgers, sandwiches, salads, pizzas, and calzones. Plus, now they offer gluten-free and vegetarian options. Legends features over 30 local and craft beers, and they accommodate all ages. Legends now has 2 locations to serve you, downtown at 677 South, 200 West, and at Southtown at 10631 South, Holiday Park Drive. The Utah Story Show is produced with the production help of Tyler Bond and Connie Lewis. Thanks for watching, and this has been Richard Marcosian signing out. The Utah Story Show is brought to you in part by Curry Pizza, who has been serving Indian food for over 10 years. They opened their first location in a small town called Bicknell in southern Utah. That's when they began serving some of the incredible pizzas such as chicken tiki masala pizza with all fresh spices and ingredients, old world fresh Italian sausage and spicy sausage, as well as mango korma pizza. Guy Fieri recently learned about Curry Pizza and featured them on his show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Check out the episode, but more importantly, check out Curry Pizza. They are truly awesome. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef. Premium, all-natural grass-fed beef delivered fresh to your door, free anywhere in the state of Utah. Order yours today at paisleys.com. That's PAIZLEES.com. Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef, always the right choice.